This content is brought to you by Uphold, which is a great platform that makes it easy and simple for you to buy, hold, and sell and earn crypto. You can trade from anything to anything. For example, you can trade between cryptocurrencies and precious metals. It's an amazing platform that I've been using for years. And in fact, I still use to this day because they're one, a great exchange, they're reputable, and they're one of the only exchanges that still lists XRP. Many of the other exchanges have delisted XRP due to the SEC lawsuit, but you can still get XRP on Uphold. So I've interviewed the CEO, the founder, and many other representatives from Uphold over the years, and I'm a fan of this platform. And once again, there's some great features like trading between different assets very easily. You don't have to convert to a currency and so forth. They're used by 10 plus million users. They have over 200 cryptocurrencies, and they have a very easy to use app. The interface is really nice. So I can certainly vouch for this platform. Once again, I've been a user for years. So if you'd like to learn more about Uphold, please visit the link in the description. Welcome back to the Thinking Crypto podcast, your home for cryptocurrency news and interviews. With me today is Ron Hammond of the Blockchain Association. Ron, great to have you back on the show.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, Ron, as always, you're the man to talk to with what is happening in DC around crypto regulations and so forth. Can you give us the latest? What are you hearing in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, sure thing. It's pretty funny because in August, typically there's a thing called August recess. It's when a lot of members of Congress go back to their districts respectively, and they campaign usually, or they're meeting with their constituents. So this is a good time for members of Congress to connect with their district and be there for an extended period of time. It is not recess by any means. Usually it's a lot more of just engaging with constituents. But in the crypto space, it has been incredibly busy here in August, even though Congress is gone. From the regulatory side, we've seen a huge explosion in terms of action from the SEC that we'll probably cover pretty soon. We've seen even some bills introduced, which is pretty odd usually for an August recess, but those do happen. And then we've seen a lot of rumors about hearings happening in September. So with the election coming up in November, there's just a lot going on. And I think September is going to be one of the busiest months we've seen in crypto in a long time. That's saying something considering some of the months we've had in the past couple of months this year. So it's a lot to cover, but it's really exciting to say the least.
Do you think the midterm elections coming up has something to do with it, with the major push behind crypto?
On some fronts there is. For example, the House Democrats, it's projected that the Democrats will probably lose the House, but those results or polls are now shifting more and more that the Republicans may take back the House, but it's looking pretty solid. But a lot of the House Democrats recently have been pushing a lot of their social initiatives more around diversity, equity, and inclusion. We saw this actually with Maxine Waters from House Financial Services, where she wants to have crypto companies. She gave it to 20 companies saying, can you please report back on your diversity and inclusion statistics, your vendors, and some other initiatives that your companies are leading to make sure that all Americans benefit, not just a certain few, as we've seen with the banking sector and stuff. So that's a big push from the Democrats. I think we'll see more of that from other committees and other members of Congress. Even if the Republicans do take back the House, this is still an important issue for a lot of Democrats. So that's where you see more different busyness when it comes to crypto, but it's taking up a lot of bandwidth for these companies to make sure they can provide these stats and show all the great initiatives that they're doing, which is really exciting to see. Whereas the banks, it's a lot more playing cover and trying to create a narrative. In crypto, there's been a lot of initiative from companies to make sure that they start this space off, making sure that all folks are considered and making sure there's a very much of an inclusive environment. So it's really exciting to see that the industry is actually excited to tell this story. But it's stuff like this we'll see a lot more of in the waning days before the election.
Yeah, for sure. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe President Biden's crypto executive order, those reports that were put out, or excuse me, the call for those reports that were put out, I think the timeline is around September, right? When they're due?
That's right. September 5th, I believe, is the last I saw. And, between the Ethereum merge, all these hearings I'm about to cover pretty soon, as well as a lot of legislation in the works that's likely going to get introduced in September. There's going to be a lot happening in DC. So I'd say to folks, follow myself and you, Tony, on Twitter. There's going to be a lot of developments here. But yeah, the executive order is going to be shaping up pretty soon. And again, with Congress having an election pretty soon, it is unlikely a lot of these things from the executive order reports are going to get put into legislation right now. Now, they could result in rulemakings down the road for agencies. They can result in further studies. But I think there still remains to be seen what exactly is going to entail from this executive order study results. But at least from the Blockchain Association perspective, we've been engaging with the White House and various agencies that have been listed pretty actively. So it's been good to have these good conversations. And candidly, we've been really impressed with the amount of knowledge level that a lot of these staffers have within the White House and the administration. So that's exciting. So we do hope these have some really good, views and findings, but we'll hold our breath and see what happens.
Now, earlier today, there was an announcement that there's going to be hearings coming up where the CFTC chairman, if I'm not mistaken, will be speaking. And then the next day, SEC chairman Gary Gensler will also be a part of a hearing. Tell us about those and what you expect.
Yeah, I think this is going to be indicative of 2023, 2024 for quite some time, is the idea of the jurisdictional battle between the SEC and the CFTC. So to your point, there's going to be a hearing in the Senate Agriculture Committee, from what it sounds like, according to some reports I've seen on Twitter, of a hearing on this Digital Commodities Consumer Protection Act. We call it DCCPA for short, or the Stabenow bill. Senator Stabenow from Michigan is the lead drafter of this legislation for the Committee on Senate Agriculture. So the idea is that there's going to be a hearing about what's the CFTC's role in regulating crypto, these digital commodity platforms that do have trading and exchanges going through. What does that look like on the regulatory side of things? The CFTC, as we've seen, has been a lot more open to having crypto regulation fall into their jurisdiction. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have the Senate Banking Committee, which oversees the SEC, and we'll be having Gary Gensler. The date I heard was September 15th from Twitter, and that's right after Chair Benham on the 14th goes. And it's a typical oversight hearing. These happen usually within the House and the Senate once a year with the SEC. But as we saw through Twitter today, actually, Representative Huizinga, he is the ranking member of the Capital Markets Subcommittee in the House. I know it's a lot of words there, but basically he is the lead Republican when it comes to the SEC and monitoring it from an oversight perspective, in addition to Representative Emmer, who we've heard a lot from. And he said in his tweet today that it's unlikely that Gary Gensler will be in front of the House. He's just going to be in front of the Senate, which, again, it's pretty rare to have just one body of Congress to have a hearing with the SEC and not the other. It's possible we could see this happen November or December. But it's still going to be pretty bombastic. And I can tell you right now, at least the SEC and some of the conversations I've had with staffers and members in the Senate, is that it's going to be focusing on crypto and ESG. Those are the two biggest issues right now, dominating a lot of folks' time. There's a few other issues like accounting standards here and there, but those are the two big issues. So I expect a lot of crypto to come up, especially with that crypto hearing in the Senate Ag. So, and these are just two hearings. There's going to be a lot more happening, it looks like, but these are the two biggest, most high-profile ones, likely, from what we've heard so far.
Wow. Sounds like September is going to be hot around crypto. I'm curious, within the circles that you're in and speaking to different regulators and members of Congress and so forth and government officials, are they aware of like how unhappy people are like on social media over the SEC, whether it be crypto or stocks? There just seems to be a growing sentiment of distrust and just general not happy with the SEC. Are folks aware of that?
Yes, and I think that's it. There's some positive to that, and there's some negative too. I've had many conversations with members of Congress and staff about Twitter engagement, and they notice that when they tweet about crypto, they get a lot of responses, whether it be more about the Ripple case or more about the SEC enforcement actions on Coinbase or others, or just the general posturing from the SEC. That a lot of complaints. A little vitriolic for some of them. So members are saying, what's going on? What is this? And that's where they, have a lot of conversations with us about it. And it is trickling down, at least, especially on the Democrat side. I've talked to a lot of staffers who said, look, we're not fans of the SEC's approach. We don't like the language that's been spewed out from the industry, from more on the Twitter side. But at the same time, we do also have to admit that there is probably something going on here that we don't like. And I think the sign that this is actually trickling down to bipartisan criticism is the Blockchain 8 letter that Representative Emmer led a couple months ago, highlighting the SEC's inquiry into a lot of crypto companies. Again, 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats. That's pretty significant for 4 Democrats to go against their own party and say, look, we have concerns. We have met with the industry. We have heard from folks on social media. There is something going on. So it's pretty rare to have this bipartisan pushback, but it's growing. There's less folks in my conversations who are in the Gary Gensler SEC camp than those who are saying, I'm a little skeptical of this, and not even just for the political reasons that he has a Democrat next to his name. It's just more because we've been hearing this from a lot of stakeholders. So it's definitely resonating, to say the least.
Well, I'm glad that message and that sentiment is trickling down. I think a lot of people will be happy to hear that their voices are being heard, with those who are unhappy.
My only request is maybe to clamp down is the aggressiveness sometimes, because that can be seen as it's definitely not helpful here. A lot of folks see that as almost violent in a sense. So good criticisms are always appreciated, but it can be sometimes a little too much.
Yeah. There's a line we can't cross, right?
Of course,
voice our displeasure, voice our criticism, but don't be how should I put it? I don't know, vitriol or whatever.
Yeah, there's a fine line here, but again, it is resonating here, so that's the good news.
So I want to ask you about the digital dollar. There's been a lot of talks recently about the United States making that push to get a CBDC going. What are you hearing, and what's kind of happening?
Yeah, actually, this kind of dovetails into the stablecoin regulation and legislation that's been so hyped up in the past couple of months. For those who may not be aware, or it's been a month, a lot has happened since. Representative McHenry, the lead Republican in the House for Financial Services, and Maxine Waters, the lead Democrat in Financial Services, were working on a bill, or currently are working on a bill, to regulate stablecoins. And we were seeing this kind of as the lowest hanging fruit in terms of big crypto policy or legislation to potentially move. With a very short timeline, the election coming up, it's going to be really hard to get that across the finish line. So this could easily be a 2023 play. But some of the conversations that we were having, and some reports have been indicating that there could be a chance for an authorization, or even just more of a study of the central bank digital currency, or digital dollar. Not all Democrats, but some Democrats are saying, look, it's important for inclusion. We think that a central bank digital currency could really help out on a lot of fronts. But on the other spectrum, we're really concerned about privacy. And Republicans share that sentiment as well, especially on the privacy side here. And a lot of folks, again, even on the Democrat side, Richie Torres, progressive from New York, tweeted out a few weeks ago, actually, that stablecoins in the private sector were largely filling a role that central bank digital currencies could fill. So I think, this is still an issue that's still being debated about here in DC. I would definitely say that the good news is that Congress is the one, according to the Fed and Treasury, that has the final say here. It's not going to be some agency unilaterally making a decision saying that, we have to do this, or we're going to do it now. It's in the role of Congress, which is a very transparent process. So at least we'll know when votes are happening or legislation's moving, if they're going to try to authorize this. But the concerns have definitely been met. And I think it's been good to see at least a really holistic approach here, not saying, we should focus on just the positives here or just the negatives. Let's look at the entire spectrum. And that's credit to both sides of the aisle here, saying, let's just make sure we do this right, not just do this first. Yeah. But there will be more developments probably in the next couple of months.
And Ron, I don't know if you can speak to this, but it would seem that when the United States rolls out something like this, they're going to educate the masses, and that will be very beneficial for crypto. And you have the interoperability. You can use a CBDC or digital dollar to buy crypto if you want. Do you see positive effects as a result towards the crypto market?
There could be positive effects, but just again, there could be a lot of negative effects here that definitely outweigh it as well. So, and again, I think the Republicans mostly have been in the camp of being more opposing a central bank digital currency, just more on the privacy issues alone. But there are also just questions like, does this actually fit the inclusion hopes and pipe dream that we have right now on the Democrat side? So then that's still not resonate as much with the Democrats on especially those on financial services. So I'd say this is more of an evolving issue right now, but very similar to what I was mentioning with the SEC. I'm seeing a lot more folks in our conversations, the more they learn more about the central bank digital currency and what they're proposing, they're saying, we need to take a step back here and do more studies. We need to understand the issue a little bit more, because this is a really big policy implication here that has a lot of issues. And the question, I think Dante DeSparta from Circle said it best, is do we want to out China? And do we want to create a central bank digital currency solely because China is doing that? There are national security implications as well. So there's a lot of things that taking into account here. And I think it's good that Congress is at least saying it's our job to do this. We're listening. We would love to hear more feedback. So that's always good to hear.
For sure. Let's talk about Tornado Cash and what the U.S. Treasury did with the sanctioning the platform, the code, versus the bad actors that were using the platform. Tell us about what you're hearing, and are you guys, trying to advocate or educate, them about this type of situation where it's like attacking the code seems like opening Pandora's box a bit?
It definitely is. And I think Coin Center has been really taking a great lead on this in terms of just highlighting to the industry, but also to policymakers of just how monumental this sanctioning was. And one thing is for sure, and I've been telling this to folks on the Hill, is we don't know all the facts yet. There's still a lot of unknowns out there. We understand that, there definitely was a reasoning for this. Treasury and OFAC felt like there was a strong enough case for them to make this decision. And so as the facts start, coming more up to light, and we find out exactly what happened with the arrest, and we have conversations at least with the developer and such, maybe with us or those within the government. I think it's always good to understand that it's good to wait and see what's happening first before making a decision. And right now, Representative Emmer, to my knowledge, is the only member of Congress at this point who has made a public statement on Tornado Cash. He sent a letter to actually Secretary Yellen highlighting his concerns about this. And a lot of these arguments stemmed from what we're seeing with Coin Center and their concerns about what this action was. But one thing I will say is here in politics in DC, this is a really tough line here. There's the issue that Republicans and Democrats, if they see anything that affects national security, especially North Korea and nuclear funding, this is going to elicit a lot of folks saying, well, look, code is law, code is speech, but there is definitely a concern here. There is definitely a fine line that has been crossed, at least to some of the reports we're seeing. So we need to make sure we're educated on this. So we're right now, at least here at the Blockchain Association, but also a lot of folks in DC, we're just level setting for folks. Like, look, here's what we know, but we're still waiting for a lot to happen here. And I will say again, Congress being out of session, being out of DC this month is probably the reason why you haven't seen too much action from Congress, or even just more public statements, which again, I think is good because they're still trying to figure out what's happening. Because a lot of the stats are pretty scary, but then of course the action itself going after code is just as scary as well.
Yeah, and I certainly, I think a lot of people can understand the government's position as well, where maybe it's a knee-jerk reaction, but maybe to your point, there's a big reason for concern because funding, I don't know who's getting funded and what terrorists, whatever it is, right? But how do we find that balance? And I think that's the thing, right? Privacy versus freedoms and things like that.
And I will say, at least in my experience, Representative Warren Davidson, when I worked for him, is very much of a passion for privacy. He's one of the biggest privacy hawks on Capitol Hill. But I will say, and it's weird how the lines cross here. A lot of super uber progressives are just as concerned about privacy as the super conservatives. And so there's a lot of weird alliances on privacy. But truthfully, the problem is that the privacy hawks in Congress are definitely outnumbered by a decent amount to the national security hawks. And there's a lot of defense folks who will say, all in the name of national security, we need to see every transaction, or we need to make sure that there is some more vetting when it comes to mixers, or should we ban these things completely? And there's a lot of knee-jerk reactions from national security because all they see is North Korea's got a lot of money from this one service or this one line of code, shut it down. And that's shared on both sides of the aisle. So my hope is that we can educate members more on the importance of privacy, but that's a very large lift. And so the good news is there's a lot of alliances here, and there's a lot of great advocates here in DC that range the gambit from progressive to conservative that can deliver that message. So we'll see how this shakes out, but I expect a lot more to come out, and I expect, there's probably more things to come to light that are pretty damning. So we'll see what happens, but I'm curious at the moment.
For sure. There was reports from Senator Pat Toomey, that a whistleblower highlighted that someone is trying to roll back what Brian Brooks did at the OCC, allowing banks to custody crypto, What are you hearing about that? And I don't know if there's any concrete statements yet, but what are you hearing about that?
Yeah, I haven't seen the concrete statements personally myself yet, but these reports are pretty concerning. And I think this is a big issue around the OCC generally. For those who may or may not know, the OCC is one of the primary bank regulators here at the federal level in DC. And Brian Brooks was one of those who helmed the OCC during the Trump administration. Now, I believe it's Michael Barr over at the OCC now. So there are concerns the OCC gets political. And this happens with every agency. Is that when a new party comes to power, they put their folks in, and it shifts here and there with the political winds. But the hope is that there at least is some stability, some understanding that look, each agency should be building off the work of their predecessor, or at least if they disagree, have an open comment rulemaking as well. So it is concerning to see a whistleblower have to go to the most senior Republican in the Senate for financial services and banking and say, I have a concern here. So, I'm not sure if folks know this, but we're hearing rumors, at least on Twitter, that the bank CEOs, the big ones, the JP Morgans, the Wells Fargo, they're going to be coming back to Capitol Hill in next month to testify in front of both the House and the Senate. That's a huge thing. When I was on Capitol Hill, this is pretty much the Super Bowl of financial services hearings when you have Jamie Dimon in front of you and you can ask him anything for 5 minutes. Crypto for sure will come up. I'm uncertain if the OCC issue will come up, but crypto definitely has come up before in the past. I'm sure it'll come up again. It could be come up in more in a critical way. But this OCC whistleblower thing, I would not be shocked that this comes up in some shape or form in those hearings. It is very concerning that there could be political pressure to tell banks not to cussy crypto.
But is the genie out of the bottle already? I mean, you got BNY Mellon and all these other banks already taking positions. I mean, Blackrock, they're not a bank, but they've also just taken a position in the market. So it's kind of like, what are they going to roll back when these big banks? JP Morgan has launched a wealth fund for clients,
Yeah, I mean, Elizabeth Warren is a good example of she's been advocating for the banks or OCC to roll back this guidance. She did a letter with 4 fairly progressive senators on the Democrat side, highlighting the OCC that she disagreed with Brian Brooks's positions. That's not shocking. That's not anything too new, but for her to go the extra step to do a formal letter and ahead of this likely hearing that's going to happen with the big bank CEOs, I think it's telling that she's going to probably go in that direction. Now, mind you, she also has her qualms with Wells Fargo to begin with. So we'll see if she more focuses on that. That's kind of where I'm leaning towards, but it's definitely going to be still a topic that comes up in these hearings. And again, it's not like these bank CEOs publicly have been too supportive of cryptocurrency, even though we know a lot of them, like, as you mentioned, are offering services or building services quietly to custody or to interact with crypto in some way, shape, or form. But it will be interesting to say the least. It is the Super Bowl of hearings for us policy folks in DC.
Yeah, and I mean, and also I think that these banks have to think about competition globally, where there's banks all around the world that are already doing crypto custody or in the process of building. So how are they going to compete?
Yeah, and to that point too, and this is actually where in the case of where a crypto lobbyist goes against the bank lobbyist, this happens a lot, but it's stablecoins, where there's been a big push for the banks saying, we only think banks should issue stablecoins. And our argument saying, look, I think the banks have done a bad job in the past on providing services and also excluding folks, candidly. We should be looking to non-banks issuing stablecoins, especially if the risk profile and the regulatory capture is mitigated. So we gotta make sure that we have the proper controls in place, the proper regulatory environment in place. But I think non-banks should be able to issue stablecoins. Circle shouldn't have to go get a banking license. They are, but I don't think that should be the case if there are some prudential standards here. And candidly, right now, it looks like the crypto lobbying side is winning versus the bank lobbying side. I think this is still going to be developing as more time comes. But from a lot of reports we've seen recently, it looks like the McHenry-Waters bill and does have a provision at the moment that says non-banks should be able to issue stablecoins. And having that bipartisan agreement, it's a pretty big win for the crypto industry and a pretty big black eye for the banks here. So that's exciting for us, but there's still a lot more to come. And we ally with the banks all the time on various provisions, but in this case, we do go head to head.
Yeah, for sure. Final question here. I mentioned it before, BlackRock, the world's largest wealth manager. I can't imagine that folks in DC are not paying attention that they have entered the crypto market, launching a Bitcoin spot trust, partnering with Coinbase. Has there been any talks? Are people surprised by this? What's the sentiment around that?
I think it's more just the growing trend that there's just more mainstream adoption here, especially with a lot of these bigger players like BlackRock really getting into the space. There's almost a sense of hype here in DC on crypto compared to traditional financial services that's unmatched. That it's almost it's the cool policy issue to be working on, which is really exciting because you don't have too many cool issues necessarily in crypto policy for us policy nerds here in DC. But at the same time, I think there's just more folks on the advocacy front. What it used to be 2 years ago, it was just me and about 5 other folks, including like Coin Center, my boss, who were lobbying on crypto. It is now 30, 40, 50, 60 folks to some capacity are lobbying on crypto. And it's a lot. It's a lot of voices to hear from. Some of them are really good in delivering the message. Some of them are really bad. And on the same side, you have the banks, and other groups who are staffing up just as much to counter the argument. So there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. And I think it can be hard to get a message through. But the good news is that seeing big firms who have been risk averse like BlackRock to this space getting more publicly involved, I think is a sign that, look, this is here to stay. Let's make sure we address this regulatory wise sooner rather than later, because the innovation's leaving. We're seeing that firsthand. So it's the time to move is now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Ron, it sounds like next month is going to be busy, and I definitely want to get you back on, as things progress next month. But, thank you for joining me today.
Of course, anytime. Buckle up. It's going to be a fun September.